The automatic doors slid open as Ethan stepped into Walker's Market, his blue polo and worn khakis making him look like any other man searching for work. At Register 3, a woman with one arm in a cast fumbled with groceries, her makeup unable to hide the bruises on her face. Tears clung to her lashes as customers looked away. Suddenly, the manager's voice cracked through the store. "Rachel, can't you handle a simple register? One more mistake and you're gone." He slammed the counter, looming over her as she whispered an apology, trembling under his glare. "Sorry doesn't pay the bills," he barked. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. He had promised himself to stay invisible, but the sight of her crumbling under such cruelty snapped something inside him. He stepped forward, voice cutting through the silence. "Is this really how you treat employees in front of customers?" The store froze. Every eye turned to the stranger who dared to challenge the manager. The customer service desk sat empty except for a heavy-set man in his 40s, pecking at a computer keyboard with 2 fingers. Steve Rodriguez looked up as Ethan approached, his eyes conducting a swift assessment that lingered too long on Ethan's skin color. "Help you?" Steve's tone carried the enthusiasm of someone asking if you wanted food poisoning. "I'm here about the cashier position." Marcus Johnson. Ethan extended his hand, which Steve shook with the grip of a dead fish. Steve's eyes narrowed as he scanned the application. "Says here you've been unemployed for 6 months. What happened to your last job?" "Company downsized. I was in inventory management." The lie came easily. Ethan had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times. Steve's skepticism was thick enough to cut. "Well, Marcus, I'll be straight with you. We've had some reliability issues with recent hires. People who think they can show up when they feel like it, you know what I mean?" Ethan knew exactly what he meant, and his blood pressure began to rise. "I'm very reliable, sir. I just need an opportunity." From the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed movement at Register 3. A black woman in her early 30s carefully lifted a case of canned goods, wincing as she adjusted the weight. Her left arm was clearly favoring something, a recent injury by the way she moved. Dark makeup couldn't quite hide the yellowing bruise around her left eye. "Rachel!" Steve's voice cracked like a whip. "These registers don't stock themselves." The woman, Rachel, according to her name tag, quickly lowered the heavy case and returned to her register. She moved with the careful precision of someone expecting to be hurt. Steve turned back to Ethan with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Look, Marcus, I'll give you a shot. But understand something. This isn't some diversity hire situation. You work hard, follow instructions, and maybe you'll make it past the trial period. We start you on stockroom duty, $7.50 an hour, and you're lucky to get that." The federal minimum wage was higher than that, but Ethan bit his tongue. "When do I start?" "Right now. Sandra will show you the ropes." Steve gestured toward an older white woman who appeared from behind the pharmacy counter. "And Marcus? Don't make me regret this." As Sandra led him toward the stockroom, Ethan caught Rachel's eye for just a moment. What he saw there made his chest tighten. Exhaustion, fear, and something else. Hope, maybe, that someone might actually see her as human. The stockroom door swung shut behind them, but Ethan's mind remained fixed on that glimpse of pain he'd witnessed. In his own store, in his own company, someone was suffering. And if Steve Rodriguez was any indication, that suffering was not only tolerated, but encouraged. The investigation had begun, and already Ethan felt sick about what he might discover. The first 2 hours of Ethan's employment at Walker's Market felt like a masterclass in passive aggression. Sandra's training consisted of pointing at boxes and saying, "Heavy stuff goes on bottom shelves. Don't drop anything expensive." Then she disappeared, leaving him alone with 40 cases of various products and no clear system for organization. When Ethan began arranging items by category, the logical approach he'd learned from building this very company, Steve appeared as if summoned by some cosmic force designed to maximize frustration. "What's this supposed to be?" Steve gestured at Ethan's methodical sorting. "I'm organizing by product type, then by expiration date. It'll make rotation easier and—" "Did I ask for your opinion on our system?" Steve's voice carried the edge of a man used to being obeyed without question. "We've been doing things a certain way here for years. Just because you think you know better doesn't mean you get to change everything on day one." Ethan bit back his response. In corporate boardrooms, he was known for his calm demeanor under pressure, but watching Steve's barely concealed hostility was testing limits he didn't know he had. "Sorry, sir. How would you like me to organize the inventory?" Steve smiled, the kind of smile a cat gives a cornered mouse. "Just stack boxes, Marcus." "Don't think so hard. Some people aren't cut out for thinking." The racial undertone was subtle, but unmistakable. Ethan's hands tightened around the case of soup cans he was holding, and for a moment he imagined the satisfaction of explaining exactly who Steve was speaking to. Instead, he nodded and continued working. Through the stockroom's window, he could see Rachel at her register. A customer was gesticulating wildly, clearly unhappy about something. Rachel's posture grew smaller with each passing second, her shoulders hunching as if trying to disappear. When the customer finally stormed off, Rachel's hand went to her injured arm, and Ethan saw her lips moving in what looked like a prayer for strength. Her register phone rang. Rachel answered with forced cheerfulness. "Walker's Market. How can I—" Her face went white. The voice on the other end was loud enough for Ethan to hear its angry tone, though not the words. Rachel's free hand began to shake. "I understand. Yes, I'll be home right after my shift. I promise." She hung up and immediately wiped tears from her eyes, glancing around to make sure no one had noticed. But someone had noticed. Ethan pretended to focus on his stacking while rage built in his chest like steam in a pressure cooker. This wasn't just about workplace harassment anymore. This was about a woman who was clearly being abused, trapped in a system that offered no protection, no support, no hope. Steve returned to the stockroom 20 minutes later, finding Ethan exactly where he'd left him, stacking boxes according to no particular logic. "Better," Steve nodded approvingly. "See? When you don't try to be too clever, things work out fine. Some folks just need to learn their place, you know." Ethan's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. "Yes, sir, I understand perfectly." But as Steve walked away, satisfied with his dominance display, Ethan was already mentally composing the first of many reports he would be filing. The question was no longer whether this store had problems. The question was how deep the rot went, and whether it was too late to save people like Rachel. Day 2 began with Ethan arriving 15 minutes early, hoping to demonstrate his commitment to the role. He found Rachel in the parking lot, sitting in a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked windshield, crying into her hands. She looked up as he passed, quickly wiping her eyes and forcing a smile. "Morning, Marcus," she said, her voice hoarse. "Everything okay?" Rachel's laugh was bitter. "Just another beautiful day in paradise." She climbed out of her car, wincing as her injured arm caught the doorframe. "You settling in all right?" Before Ethan could answer, Steve's voice boomed across the parking lot. "Rachel, move it! We open in 20 minutes and I need those registers counted." Rachel's shoulders sagged. "Coming!" She turned to Ethan with apologetic eyes. "Welcome to Walker's Market, Marcus. Try to keep your head down." The day's humiliation began almost immediately. Steve positioned himself near Ethan's assigned section, cleaning supplies appropriately enough, and made a show of supervising every move. "Careful with that bleach, Marcus. I know it might be tempting, but these products aren't for personal use." Steve's comment drew snickers from 2 white employees restocking nearby shelves. When a well-dressed white customer approached looking for a specific product, Steve intercepted before Ethan could respond. "Ma'am, let me help you with that. Marcus here is still learning the basics." To Ethan, he added loudly enough for others to hear, "Why don't you focus on mopping? We need someone who can handle that level of responsibility." The customer looked between Steve and Ethan with obvious discomfort. "Actually, I'm sure this gentleman can help me find—" "Trust me, ma'am. You want someone who knows the store." Steve's tone was pure condescension, wrapped in false courtesy. "Some of our newer employees need more time to adapt to our standards." Ethan felt heat rise in his neck as he realized what Steve was doing. This wasn't just workplace bullying. This was a calculated performance designed to humiliate him in front of customers, to reinforce some twisted hierarchy where his skin color determined his competence. The customer walked away shaking her head, clearly disturbed by what she'd witnessed. Ethan gripped the mop handle and continued cleaning, but his mind was racing. How many other employees had endured this treatment? How many had simply quit rather than file complaints? Around noon, the situation escalated. Rachel's register jammed during a busy lunch rush, and Steve stormed over with theatrical fury. "What did you do this time?" he demanded, his voice carrying across the entire front of the store. "Nothing, Mr. Rodriguez." It just stopped working. Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "Right. Nothing." Steve's sarcasm was thick enough to choke on. "Just like yesterday when you accidentally gave the wrong change, and last week when you were too tired to stay for inventory." Ethan paused in his mopping, recognizing the classic abuser's tactic, public shaming designed to isolate and control. Rachel's face was burning with embarrassment as other customers began to stare. "Maybe we need someone more reliable on Register 3, Steve continued. "Someone who can handle basic responsibilities without constant mistakes." Rachel's hands were shaking now, and Ethan could see she was fighting back tears. That's when he noticed her phone buzzing with text messages. Each notification made her flinch as if she'd been slapped. "Please, Mr. Rodriguez, I need this job. I have 2 children." "Then maybe you should act like it." Steve's voice dripped with mock sympathy. "Marcus, get over here and help Rachel figure out this register. Maybe between the 2 of you, you can manage what one competent employee normally handles." As Ethan approached the register, he caught a glimpse of Rachel's phone screen. The message was from someone named Logan. "You're dead when you get home." "I know what you did." Rachel saw him reading and quickly turned the phone face down, but not before Ethan noticed her hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold it. "I'm sorry about this," she whispered to him as they worked to clear the register jam. "This isn't your fault," Ethan replied quietly. Rachel looked at him with surprise, as if the concept of someone taking her side was foreign. "You don't understand." "Mr. Rodriguez is right. I make too many mistakes. I can't focus properly." "Maybe you can't focus because you're afraid." The words slipped out before Ethan could stop them. Rachel's eyes widened, and for a moment, he saw her defenses crack. But then Steve returned, and the walls went back up. "Fixed yet?" Steve demanded. "Yes, sir," Rachel replied, her voice mechanical. "Good." "Marcus, back to mopping. And next time, maybe we'll find someone who doesn't need help with basic technology." As Ethan returned to his cleaning duties, his phone buzzed with a text from his head of legal. "Ready to move when you give the word." Soon, Ethan thought. Very soon. But first, he needed to understand exactly what Rachel was facing at home. Because if Logan was threatening her, Steve's workplace harassment was only part of a much larger pattern of abuse. And if there was one thing Ethan Walker couldn't tolerate, it was people who hurt those who couldn't fight back. Day 3 began with an ominous text message that Rachel thought no one could see. Ethan, restocking the magazine rack nearby, caught a glimpse of her phone screen as she opened it during her break. The message from Logan was short and terrifying. "You're dead when you get home." "I know what you did." Rachel's coffee cup slipped from her trembling hands, shattering on the break room floor. She immediately dropped to her knees to clean it up, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," Ethan said softly, kneeling beside her. "Let me help." "No!" The word came out sharper than she intended. I can handle it. I always handle it." As they cleaned up the broken ceramic, Ethan noticed fresh bruises on Rachel's wrists, finger-shaped marks that spoke of violence too recent to hide. When she caught him looking, she pulled her sleeves down and wrapped her arms around herself. "Who's Logan?" Ethan asked gently. Rachel's face went white. "How do you... You can't... Please don't tell Mr. Rodriguez I was on my phone. I'll lose my job." "I won't tell anyone." "But Rachel, if someone is hurting you..." "You don't understand." Her voice broke completely. "Logan he's my boyfriend. He takes care of me and my kids. Without him, we'd be homeless. I can't leave." The classic cycle of abuse, Ethan realized. Financial dependence, isolation, threats. Rachel was trapped not just by one man, but by an entire system designed to keep vulnerable people powerless. That's when Steve appeared in the doorway like a storm cloud. "Break time's over, Rachel. And Marcus, you've got 5 minutes to finish your section or you're staying late without pay." The threat was illegal, but Ethan bit his tongue. Steve was escalating, becoming bolder in his violations. It was time to start documenting everything. The morning shift brought a new level of harassment. Steve had apparently decided that Slow Marcus was his new favorite target, and he wasn't content with subtle digs anymore. When a delivery truck arrived with pallets of merchandise, Steve assigned Ethan to unload it single-handedly. "Think you can handle this, Marcus? Or should I call corporate and tell them we need someone more capable?" The racist implication hung in the air like thick tension. 2 white employees watched from the loading dock, their expressions ranging from discomfort to outright amusement. Ethan began unloading boxes, his mind calculating not just the physical effort, but the legal ramifications of every discriminatory comment. Around noon, the situation took a darker turn. Logan Pierce arrived at the store. Ethan recognized him immediately from Rachel's terrified reaction. Logan was a big man, early 30s, with the kind of build that suggested either manual labor or time in the gym. His smile was all charm as he approached Rachel's register, but Ethan could see the calculation behind his eyes. "Hey, baby," Logan said loudly enough for other customers to hear. "Just wanted to check on you. Make sure you're being a good girl at work." Rachel's entire body went rigid. "I'm working, Logan. You shouldn't be here." "What? Can't a man visit his woman at work?" Logan's voice carried a threatening undertone disguised as playfulness. "Besides, I had some questions about your schedule. You've been getting home later than usual. I told you they've been asking me to stay for inventory." "Right. Inventory." Logan reached across the counter and grabbed Rachel's wrist, the one with the finger-shaped bruises. She gasped in pain, but didn't pull away. "Funny thing is, I called yesterday. Steve said inventory was finished at 5. You didn't get home until 7:30. Ethan watched this domestic terrorism unfold, his hands clenching into fists. Rachel was trapped between Logan's accusations and Steve's harassment, with no safe space anywhere in her life. "Logan, please." "There are customers." "Let them watch," Logan said, his grip tightening. "Let them see what happens when people lie to me." That's when Ethan made his decision. Investigation or not, he couldn't stand by and watch this happen. "Excuse me," he said, approaching the register with a cleaning spray and cloth. "Steve asked me to clean this area." Logan looked up with annoyance. "We're having a private conversation here, buddy." "I understand, sir." "Just following orders." Ethan began wiping down nearby surfaces, positioning himself within arm's reach of Rachel. Logan's eyes narrowed as he studied Ethan's face. "You new here?" "Yes, sir. Just started this week." "Well, new guy, here's some advice. Mind your own business." Logan's voice dropped to a whisper, but his words carried clearly. "Rachel here belongs to me, and I don't like people who get too friendly with what's mine." Ethan met Logan's stare directly. "Just cleaning, sir. That's all." For a moment, the two men faced each other across an invisible line. Logan was clearly used to intimidating people, but something in Ethan's calm confidence threw him off balance. Finally, Logan released Rachel's wrist and stepped back. "Remember what we talked about, baby?" he said to Rachel. "Be home by 6. Not 6:01. 6. After Logan left, Rachel collapsed against her register, shaking uncontrollably. Ethan pretended to continue cleaning while keeping watch for Steve's return. "Are you okay?" he whispered. Rachel shook her head. "He's going to kill me this time." "I know it. He thinks I'm cheating because I've been working late, but I can't tell him about the harassment because then he'll make me quit. And we need the money. And... Rachel, listen to me. There are people who can help. Shelters, legal aid. You don't understand." Her voice cracked with desperation. "He has friends. Police friends. I've tried to report him before, and they just told him what I said. It made everything worse." Ethan's blood ran cold. Corruption in local law enforcement would explain why Rachel felt so hopeless, why she couldn't see any way out of her situation. That afternoon, Steve decided to escalate his own harassment campaign. He called an impromptu meeting with all the floor staff, ostensibly to discuss performance issues. "We've been having some problems lately," Steve announced to the group of 8 employees. "Inventory shortages, customer complaints, general lack of efficiency. Now, I'm not saying anyone's stealing, but when we have new people who don't understand our culture." His eyes landed on Ethan with unmistakable intent. "Some folks come from different backgrounds, different standards. They might think what's acceptable in their neighborhood is okay here too." The racist dog whistle was so blatant that several employees shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Fear had created a culture of silence that allowed bullies like Steve to thrive. "From now on, we're implementing new security measures. Bag checks for certain employees, extra supervision for people who might need more guidance." Ethan realized with crystal clarity that these security measures would be selectively enforced based on skin color. Steve was creating a systematized form of workplace harassment that would be nearly impossible to prove in court. But Steve had made one crucial mistake. He was doing all of this in front of Ethan Walker, founder and CEO of Walker's Market Corporation. And Ethan had access to resources that Steve couldn't even imagine. That evening, as Ethan sat in his car watching Rachel leave the store, his phone buzzed with reports from the private investigators he'd hired to look into Logan Pierce's background. What they'd found made his stomach turn. Logan Pierce, age 32. Former security guard fired for excessive force. 3 domestic violence arrests, no convictions thanks to witness intimidation and his connections with local police. 2 previous girlfriends had filed restraining orders. Both had later withdrawn them after suspicious accidents. Rachel wasn't just being abused, she was being stalked by a predator with a documented history of violence and the protection of corrupt law enforcement. As Ethan watched Rachel's old Honda disappear into the evening traffic, he made a decision that would change everything. The investigation phase was over. Tomorrow, Steve Rodriguez and Logan Pierce would learn that they had chosen the wrong victims to torment, and they would discover exactly what happened when someone with unlimited resources decided to fight back. Day 3, 4:47 p.m. The moment that would change everything began with Rachel's phone ringing. Ethan was cleaning windows near Register 3 when he heard Logan's voice explode from the speaker. Rachel had answered on speakerphone by accident, and Logan's rage filled the immediate area. "Where the hell are you? I told you to be home by now." "Logan, please, my shift doesn't end until 5. "Don't lie to me. I drove by and saw you talking to that new guy again. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't know what you're doing?" Rachel's face went white as several customers turned to stare. "Logan, there are people here. Can we please—" "I don't care who's there. You belong to me, Rachel. M.E. And when I get my hands on you tonight—" The line went dead. Rachel stood frozen, her injured arm trembling as she held the phone. Around her, customers exchanged uncomfortable glances, some pulling out their own phones to record what was clearly a domestic dispute playing out in public. That's when Steve chose to make his entrance. "What's all the commotion here?" Steve demanded, surveying the scene with obvious displeasure. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rodriguez. It was just—" "A personal call during work hours," Steve finished, "in front of customers. Do you have any idea how unprofessional this looks?" Rachel's voice came out as barely a whisper. "It wasn't my fault. He called me—" "There's always an excuse with you people, isn't there?" Steve's voice was loud enough to carry across the entire front of the store. "First it's my arm hurts, then it's I can't focus, now it's he called me. When does it end, Rachel?" Ethan stepped closer, his hands tightening around the cleaning supplies he was carrying. The racist undertone in Steve's comment was unmistakable, and the public humiliation was clearly calculated. "Sir," Ethan interjected quietly, "maybe we could handle this privately." "Did I ask for your opinion, Marcus?" Steve whirled on him with barely contained fury. "This is exactly the problem with this place. Too many people who don't know their place, don't understand how things work." A small crowd was gathering now, customers with their phones out, other employees watching from behind shelves. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Steve seemed to be feeding off the attention. "You know what?" Steve announced loudly. "I'm sick of this. Rachel, you're done for the day. And Marcus, since you seem so interested in other people's business, you can finish her register count. Maybe next time you'll mind your own damn business." But then Steve made his fatal mistake. As Rachel moved to leave her register, her phone buzzed with a text message. The screen was visible to everyone nearby, and the message from Logan was simple and terrifying. "Tell them Marcus stole money, or you and the kids are dead tonight." Rachel stared at the message, her face cycling through terror, despair, and finally resignation. She looked up at Steve, then at Ethan, then at the crowd of customers watching this drama unfold. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, her voice hollow, "I need to report something. Marcus stole money from my register." The words hit like a bomb. Steve's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction, while several customers gasped audibly. Someone's phone was definitely recording now. "Are you sure about this accusation, Rachel?" Steve asked, but his tone suggested he was savoring every moment. "Yes," Rachel whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I saw him take $200 from my drawer when I went on break." Ethan felt the world narrow to a single point of focus. This was it. The moment where he could either maintain his cover or watch an innocent woman be forced to participate in her own destruction. Steve turned to him with triumphant malice. "Well, Marcus, anything to say for yourself?" "Actually, yes," Ethan said calmly. "I have quite a lot to say." He pulled out his phone and pressed a number on speed dial. The call connected immediately. "Mr. Walker?" The voice was professional, crisp, and loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is Margaret Thompson from Corporate Legal. We've been monitoring the situation as requested. Are you ready for intervention?" The silence that followed was absolute. Steve's face went through several rapid color changes, settling on a shade of green that suggested nausea. Rachel looked confused. while the crowd of customers suddenly realized they were witnessing something much bigger than a simple workplace dispute. "Yes, Margaret," Ethan said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone used to being obeyed. "I think it's time." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a card that Steve recognized immediately, the platinum corporate ID of the CEO of Walker's Market Corporation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan announced, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent store, "my name is Ethan Walker. I'm the founder and CEO of this company. For the past 3 days, I've been working here undercover to investigate reports of discrimination, harassment, and workplace abuse." Steve's knees actually buckled. Several customers gasped, and at least 3 people were now openly filming the revelation. "Rachel," Ethan continued, turning to the woman who had been forced to lie about him, "you are not in trouble. What just happened was not your fault. Steve Rodriguez, however, is terminated effective immediately for violations of company policy, federal employment law, and basic human decency." Rachel stared at him with an expression of absolute shock. You're really the CEO?" "I am. And I want you to know that Logan Pierce's threats against you and your children have been recorded and forwarded to the FBI Domestic Violence Task Force. He's being arrested as we speak." As if summoned by his words, Ethan's phone rang. He answered on speaker. "Mr. Walker? This is Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI. Logan Pierce is in custody. We found weapons, threatening messages, and evidence of stalking multiple victims. He won't be bothering Miss Morgan or anyone else for a very long time." The crowd erupted. Some people cheered, others continued filming, and at least one person started crying. Steve Rodriguez stood in the middle of it all like a man watching his entire world collapse. But Ethan's attention was focused solely on Rachel, who had sunk to her knees behind her register, sobbing with what looked like the release of years of accumulated fear and despair. "It's over," Ethan told her gently. "Both of them. It's finally over." For the first time in months, Rachel's tears were tears of relief. The next 48 hours moved with the swift efficiency of corporate justice, backed by unlimited resources. Ethan had spent 20 years building Walker's Market into an empire, and now he used every tool at his disposal to dismantle the system of abuse that had flourished in his absence. Steve Rodriguez was escorted from the premises by security within 20 minutes of Ethan's revelation. His termination paperwork cited gross misconduct, discriminatory practices, creating a hostile work environment, and violation of company anti-harassment policies. But that was just the beginning. Ethan's legal team had been documenting everything for days. Every racist comment, every discriminatory policy, every moment of harassment had been recorded, witnessed, and cataloged. Steve would never work in retail management again. His name would be flagged in every major employment database in the country. But Logan's downfall was even more complete. The FBI had been building a case against Logan for weeks, ever since Ethan's private investigators uncovered his connections to a network of corrupt local police officers who had been covering up domestic violence cases. Logan's arrest triggered a federal investigation that would eventually bring down 6 officers and 2 judges. When FBI agents searched Logan's apartment, they found weapons, detailed surveillance photos of Rachel and her children, and threatening messages to 3 other women in similar situations. Most damning of all, they discovered Logan's insurance policy, recordings of police officers discussing how to make domestic violence cases disappear. Mr. Pierce thought he was untouchable, Agent Martinez explained to Ethan during a briefing call. He had convinced several women that reporting him was useless because he owned the local police. Turns out, he wasn't wrong about the corruption, but he made one crucial mistake. What's that? He threatened someone under federal protection. The moment he involved Rachel in workplace crimes while we were investigating him, it became our jurisdiction. He's looking at federal charges for stalking, interstate domestic violence, corruption, and conspiracy. 25 years minimum. The social media response was immediate and overwhelming. The video of Ethan's revelation had been posted by multiple customers and gone viral within hours. Undercover CEO Justice began trending worldwide, with millions of people sharing stories of their own workplace harassment experiences. But the most satisfying moment came when Walker's Market stock price rose in response to the news. Investors, it seemed, approved of a CEO who was willing to go undercover to protect his employees. 3 days after the confrontation, Ethan stood in the corporate boardroom addressing his executive team. What happened in Atlanta was not an isolated incident, he told the room full of worried faces. Our preliminary investigation has identified similar patterns in at least 12 other locations. We've been failing our employees, and that stops now. He announced the creation of the Walker's Market Safe Workplace Initiative, a $50 million program that would provide legal support for employees facing domestic violence, mandatory sensitivity training for all management staff, and an anonymous reporting system that bypassed local management entirely. We're also establishing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination and harassment, Ethan continued. One verified incident and you're gone. No warnings, no second chances. We're going to be the safest place to work in retail, or we're going to shut down trying. The program would be named after Rachel Morgan, who had been promoted to regional training coordinator for the new initiative. Her salary had tripled. Her children would receive full college scholarships, and she would never again have to choose between safety and survival. But perhaps the most important change was cultural. Word of Ethan's undercover investigation spread through the company's 50,000 employees like wildfire. Suddenly, managers weren't sure who might be watching. Corporate visits became opportunities for honest feedback rather than carefully choreographed performances. The fear that had allowed people like Steve Rodriguez to thrive was replaced by something much more powerful. Hope that someone at the top actually cared about the people at the bottom. Steve Rodriguez, meanwhile, was discovering that actions have consequences. Unable to find work in his field, facing multiple lawsuits from former employees who had been encouraged by Rachel's courage to speak up, he was forced to move back in with his elderly mother. His LinkedIn profile, once proudly displaying 15 years of management experience, now sat empty. Logan Pierce's fate was sealed when 3 other women came forward with similar stories after seeing the news coverage. Each had endured years of abuse, convinced that the system would never protect them. Now, with federal backing and unlimited legal resources, they finally had their day in court. The judge who sentenced Logan to 25 years in federal prison said it best. "Mr. Pierce, you preyed on vulnerable women because you believed you were above the law. Today, you learn that no one is above justice, especially when people with power decide to use it responsibly." As Ethan watched the news coverage of Logan's sentencing from his office, he thought about the ripple effects of those 3 days in Atlanta. One undercover investigation had exposed a network of corruption, saved multiple lives, and fundamentally changed how his company operated. But most importantly, it had given Rachel Morgan her life back. And sometimes, that was worth more than all the money in the world. 1 week later, Ethan sat in his corner office overlooking downtown Atlanta, the city lights twinkling in the evening darkness. On his desk was a photo that hadn't been there before. Rachel, with her 2 children, Marcus and Destiny, at the grand opening of the new Walker's Market Training Center. The change in Rachel's face was remarkable. Gone were the hunched shoulders, the fearful glances, the careful movements of someone expecting to be hurt. In their place was confidence, purpose, and most importantly, hope. Her children, no longer living in fear, were smiling real smiles for the first time in years. "Please call me Ethan. And yes, everything's fine. I just wanted to check on you. How are you settling into the new position?" Rachel's laugh was light, free of the fear that had once marked every conversation. "It's amazing, Ethan. Yesterday, I trained 30 managers on recognizing signs of domestic violence in employees. 3 of them came up afterward and said they had situations in their stores they wanted to address. And how are Marcus and Destiny adjusting? They're doing great. Marcus asked me yesterday if Logan was really gone forever. When I told him yes, he smiled for the first time since before Logan came into our lives. And Destiny? She's 8 years old and she told her teacher she wants to be a CEO when she grows up, just like you. Ethan felt his throat tighten with emotion. Tell her that she can be anything she wants to be. And if she ever needs advice on how to run a company, she knows where to find me. After hanging up, Ethan stood at his window, looking out at the city where his journey had begun. 3 days as Marcus Johnson had taught him more about his own company than 20 years as CEO, but more importantly, it had reminded him why he'd started Walker's Market in the first place. The next morning brought a visitor Ethan hadn't expected. Agent Martinez from the FBI knocked on his office door, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression of professional satisfaction. "Mr. Walker, I wanted to update you personally on the Logan Pierce case. His conviction has opened up investigations in 6 other states. We've identified at least 12 other victims, and we're working with local advocacy groups to ensure they all have access to the resources they need." Agent Martinez closed her folder. "Mr. Walker, in 20 years of law enforcement, I've never seen corporate power used so effectively to protect vulnerable people. You could have just fired Steve Rodriguez quietly and covered this up. Instead, you chose to shine a light on a problem that extends far beyond your company. It was the right thing to do." Yes, it was. And because of that choice, 27 women are free from men who thought they were untouchable. That's not just good business, Mr. Walker. That's heroism. 6 months later, the Walker's Market Safe Workplace Initiative had become a model for corporate America. Other companies were implementing similar programs, and Ethan found himself testifying before Congress about the responsibility of business leaders to protect their employees. But the real measure of success wasn't in the awards or recognition. It was in the stories that reached his desk every day. Like Maria Gonzalez from Phoenix, who reported her abusive supervisor and was promoted to store manager after his termination. Like James Patterson from Detroit, who used the anonymous reporting system to expose a manager who was systematically scheduling black employees for the worst shifts. Like Sarah Williams from Seattle, whose manager was stealing tips from servers. Each story represented a life changed, a person empowered, a voice finally heard. The photograph from Rachel's team meeting still sat on Ethan's desk, joined by dozens of others. Pictures of grand openings for new training centers, images of employees receiving promotions and scholarships, photos of families who no longer lived in fear. But perhaps the most meaningful addition was a drawing from 8-year-old Destiny Morgan. It showed a stick figure in a business suit standing in front of a building labeled Walker's Market, with the words, "Thank you for saving my mommy," written in purple crayon. "Mr. Walker? This is Jennifer Williams. I work at a grocery chain in California. I've been following your story, and I wanted you to know that your example gave me the courage to report my manager for harassment. He was fired yesterday. I'm glad you found your voice, Jennifer. How are you doing?" "Better than I have in years. But that's not why I'm calling. I wanted to ask you something. What would you say to people who think they're too small to make a difference? People who see injustice but don't believe they have the power to change anything?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, considering the question that went to the heart of everything he'd learned. "I'd tell them that change doesn't require a title or a fortune or a position of authority. It requires a decision, the decision to refuse to be a bystander to injustice, the decision to speak up when others stay silent, the decision to act when others choose indifference." He paused, thinking of Rachel's courage in that final moment when she chose truth over fear. You don't have to be a CEO to change someone's world. Sometimes all it takes is being willing to say, "This is wrong, and I won't be part of it." That's not weakness. That's power. Real power. After hanging up, Ethan walked to his window one final time, looking out at the city that had taught him so much about the gap between who he thought he was and who he actually needed to be. The story was far from over. Every interview, every speech, every public appearance was another opportunity to spread the message that had become his mission. No one should have to choose between dignity and survival. His phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Destiny made honor roll again. She told her teacher she's going to run the biggest, fairest company in the world someday. Thank you for showing her what's possible. Ethan typed back. Tell her the world is ready for leaders like her. And when she's ready to take over, I'll be happy to step aside. As he prepared to leave the office that evening, Ethan took one last look at the photographs covering his desk. Faces of courage, voices of change, proof that one person's decision to act could ripple outward in ways that transformed not just a company, but an entire culture. The question wasn't whether he had made a difference. The question was what others would do with the example he'd set. Because somewhere out there, in companies and communities across the country, people were facing the same choice he'd faced in that Atlanta parking lot. Walk away from injustice or walk toward it with purpose. The future would be decided by which choice they made. And if Ethan had learned anything from his 3 days as Marcus Johnson, it was this. When good people decide to act, there's no limit to the change they can create. The only question was whether they would choose to use their voice, no matter how small that voice might seem.